The bustling streets of downtown Willow Creek were alive with activity. Cars honked in frustration, street vendors called out to potential customers, and office workers hurried past, their faces buried in their phones. Among the chaos, no one seemed to notice the man sitting on the corner of Maple and Fifth Avenue, hunched against the cold stone wall of an old building. His name was Henry Carter, a man in his early 50s with a weathered face that told stories of hardships most people couldn't imagine. His clothes were tattered, his coat threadbare, barely offering protection against the biting winter wind. His hands, rough and calloused, clutched a small cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." Most passers-by didn't even glance in his direction. Some avoided eye contact deliberately, quickening their pace as if his presence was an inconvenience to their day. Others whispered to each other, their words laced with judgment. To them, Henry was invisible, a problem to be ignored, a shadow that blended into the background. But Henry had once been more than just a shadow. Years ago, he was a promising musician, a man with dreams as vibrant as the city around him. He had performed in jazz clubs, filling the air with melodies that made people sway and smile. But life had a way of unraveling dreams, and one tragedy after another had left Henry with nothing but his memories and a small harmonica he kept tucked in his pocket. As Henry sat silently, his stomach growling and his spirit weary, a young boy approached him. The boy, no older than 10, tugged on his mother's coat, pointing at Henry. "Mom, can we help him?" the boy asked, his innocent eyes wide with concern. The mother pulled her son gently away, her tone hushed but firm. "No, sweetie, let's go. You never know what kind of trouble they're in." Henry overheard the exchange, his heart sinking. He wasn't angry, he was used to it. But each rejection chipped away at the hope he clung to, making the weight of his circumstances feel unbearable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Henry closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. He had no illusions about what the night would bring, just another battle against hunger, cold, and loneliness. But what Henry didn't know was that his story wasn't over. Something unexpected was about to happen, something that would remind everyone who crossed his path that every person, no matter how invisible they seem, carries a story worth hearing. The streetlights flickered to life as the city's rush hour began to wane. Henry remained on his corner, his weary eyes scanning the few remaining passers-by, though he no longer expected any kindness to come his way. His fingers fiddled absent-mindedly with the harmonica in his coat pocket, the only piece of his past he hadn't lost. As he leaned back, trying to shield himself from the cold, a soft voice broke through the din of the street. "Excuse me, sir. Are you all right?" Henry blinked and looked up. Standing before him was a young woman, no older than 25, dressed in a plain gray hoodie and worn jeans. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Despite her modest appearance, there was a quiet strength in her posture, and her kind eyes reflected genuine concern. "I'm fine," Henry muttered, his voice hoarse, "just trying to get through the night." The woman crouched down to his level, ignoring the glances of the few people who passed by. "My name's Elena," she said, her tone warm but not patronizing. "I saw you sitting here earlier and thought you might need something to eat." From her bag, she pulled out a neatly wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water, holding them out to him. Henry hesitated, his pride warring with his hunger. "It's okay," Elena said gently. "Take it. I packed extras." Finally, Henry accepted the offering, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're welcome," Elena said, sitting down on the curb beside him. She didn't flinch at the cold or the dirt, her demeanor unbothered by the judgment of others. "What's your name?" "Henry," he replied, glancing at her with cautious curiosity. "You don't seem like most people around here." Elena smiled faintly. "Most people don't stop, do they?" Henry shook his head. "Not really." They sat in silence for a moment, Henry eating the sandwich slowly while Elena rummaged through her bag. She pulled out a small notebook and pen, scribbling something before tearing off a sheet of paper. I work at a shelter a few blocks away, she explained, handing him the note. They've got hot meals, beds, and people who can help with whatever you need. If you're interested, you can go there. Just tell them Elena sent you. Henry studied the paper, the neatly written address blurring slightly as his eyes welled up. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice filled with both gratitude and confusion. You don't even know me. Elena shrugged. You don't have to know someone to care about them. Everyone deserves a little help now and then. Her words struck a chord in Henry, stirring something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For years he had been dismissed, ignored, and judged. But here was someone who saw him not as a burden, but as a person, someone worth helping. You remind me of someone I used to know, he said quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She used to say things like that. Elena tilted her head, intrigued. Who? A friend, Henry replied. Someone who believed in me, back when I was worth believing in. Elena's brow furrowed. You're still worth believing in, Henry. The sincerity in her voice made his chest tighten. For so long, he had defined himself by his circumstances. But Elena's words planted a seed of something he thought he had lost. The possibility of redemption. As Elena stood to leave, she looked back at him with a smile. I hope to see you at the shelter. But even if I don't, just know that people care. You're not alone. Henry watched her walk away, the note clutched tightly in his hand. The cold night no longer felt quite as harsh. For the first time in years he felt seen, and it was because of a simple act of kindness from a stranger who chose to sit with him, to listen, and to remind him of his worth. Little did he know, this encounter would set into motion a chain of events that would change not only his life but the lives of everyone around him. As the cold night wrapped around Henry, he sat with the note in his hands, reading and rereading the address Elena had given him. The soft ink smudges where his calloused fingers had touched the paper were a testament to his hesitation. He knew the shelter she mentioned. It was one of those places he'd walked by many times but never entered, his pride and fear holding him back. Henry had been on the streets long enough to understand how people viewed him. To most, he was invisible. But those who did notice often saw him through a lens of judgment or pity. Elena's kindness had unsettled him, not because it felt fake, but because it felt genuine. And that sincerity forced Henry to confront something he had buried deep inside. His sense of self-worth. For hours, Henry wrestled with his thoughts. Part of him wanted to go to the shelter, to take the first step toward reclaiming the life he had lost. But another part clung to the shame that had become his constant companion. What if they turn me away? What if I'm too far gone? The questions churned in his mind, feeding the self-doubt that had grown over the years. The internal struggle brought memories rushing back, of his days as a musician, when his talent had filled rooms with applause and his heart with pride. He thought of his closest friend, Rebecca, who had always believed in him. She was the one who pushed him to chase his dreams, who stood by him when life threw its worst. But when she passed away in a sudden accident, Henry's world crumbled. Grief consumed him, and he found himself spiraling into a void he couldn't escape. Elena's words echoed in his mind. You're still worth believing in. They reminded him of something Rebecca had once said. It's never too late to turn things around. But back then, Henry had dismissed it as hopeful optimism. Now he wasn't so sure. The next morning, Henry mustered the courage to walk to the shelter. The building was modest but welcoming, with colorful murals painted on its walls. As he stood outside, the noise of bustling volunteers and laughter from children inside reached his ears. Yet his feet felt like they were glued to the pavement. What if they see me the way everyone else does? He thought. The weight of that fear was suffocating, but so was the thought of staying on the streets, trapped in a cycle of despair. Finally, he stepped through the doors. Inside, a kind-faced man greeted him at the front desk. Welcome, the man said warmly. What can we do for you today? Henry hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena sent me. The man's face lit up. Ah, Elena. She's one of our best. Let me show you around. As Henry followed him through the building, he saw volunteers sorting donations, children laughing in a playroom, and people sitting together at tables, sharing meals and stories. It was a far cry from the harshness of the streets, a space that radiated warmth and humanity. The man led him to a quiet corner where Elena was stacking cans of food on a shelf. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "Henry, you came." Her joy at seeing him caught him off guard. "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted. "I didn't think I belonged here." Elena placed the cans she was holding on the shelf and walked over to him. "Everyone belongs here," she said firmly. "That's the whole point." As the days passed, Henry began to settle into the shelter's routines. First, it was difficult. He struggled with feelings of guilt for accepting help and with the pride that told him he should be able to fix his life on his own. But the kindness of the staff and volunteers slowly began to chip away at those walls. One afternoon, while sitting in the common area, Henry noticed an old piano pushed into a corner. It was out of tune, the keys worn from years of use. His fingers twitched at the sight of it, a muscle memory from another life. He hesitated but eventually approached it, lifting the cover and pressing a single key. The note rang out, sharp but familiar. The sound caught Elena's attention. She walked over, her expression curious. "Do you play?" she asked. Henry nodded slowly. "I used to. It's been a long time." "Play something," she encouraged. With trembling hands, Henry placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a simple melody. Though the piano was out of tune, the music was hauntingly beautiful. Heads turned as others in the room paused to listen. For the first time in years, Henry felt the joy of creating something, of being seen for more than his circumstances. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Elena clapped the loudest, her smile wide. "Henry, that was incredible." He looked down at the keys, his emotions a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I didn't think I still had it in me," he said softly. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've always had it in you. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." That moment marked a turning point for Henry. It wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about reclaiming a piece of himself he thought he had lost forever. Elena's unwavering belief in him had challenged the narrative he had carried for so long, forcing him to see that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he believed. Little did Henry know, this rediscovery of his talent would become the foundation for a transformation that would inspire not just him, but everyone who crossed his path. The applause from Henry's impromptu piano performance stayed with him long after the echoes faded. It was more than just appreciation for the melody. It was a reminder that he had something to offer, a spark of purpose that had been buried under years of hardship. That moment marked the beginning of his transformation. The next morning, Elena found Henry in the shelter's main room, cleaning the piano keys with a damp cloth. "I figured if I'm going to keep playing this thing, it might as well be clean," he said with a small smile. Elena chuckled. "I think that piano's been waiting for someone like you. You brought it back to life." Henry looked at her, the sincerity in her words cutting through his lingering doubts. "You brought me back to life," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'd have made it through the winter if you hadn't stopped that night." Elena shook her head. "You give me too much credit. All I did was remind you of what was already there." Over the next few weeks, Henry began to integrate himself into the shelter's daily activities. He volunteered to help wherever he could, whether it was cleaning, organizing donations, or simply lending an ear to others who were struggling. His time at the piano became a daily ritual, and it wasn't long before his music became a source of comfort and connection for everyone at the shelter. Word of Henry's talent spread, and one evening, Elena approached him with an idea. "We're hosting a benefit concert next month to raise funds for the shelter," she said. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to perform." Henry's first instinct was to refuse. "Elena, I'm not the man I used to be. I haven't performed in years, and I don't even know if people would want to hear me." "They would," Elena said firmly. "You've already inspired everyone here with your music. This is your chance to share that gift with the world again." Henry hesitated, his mind racing with self-doubt. But Elena's unwavering belief in him planted a seed of courage. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it." In the weeks leading up to the concert, Henry threw himself into preparation. The shelter staff and residents rallied around him, offering encouragement and support. Elena worked tirelessly to organize the event, securing a local venue and spreading the word throughout the community. On the night of the concert, Henry stood backstage, his heart pounding. The venue was packed with people. Shelter supporters, local residents, and even a few familiar faces from his past. Among them was a young boy clutching a harmonica, looking up at the stage with wide eyes. Henry couldn't help but smile. He had been that boy once, filled with dreams and a love for music. Elena appeared beside him, her expression calm but encouraging. "You ready?" Henry nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." As he walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. He sat at the piano, his hands trembling slightly as he placed them on the keys. Closing his eyes, he began to play, a soulful melody that filled the room with raw emotion. The music told a story of loss, resilience, and redemption, a reflection of his journey. When he finished, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. Henry stood, overwhelmed by the response, and bowed his head in gratitude. Elena joined him on stage, a microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "this is Henry Carter. He's not just a talented musician. He's a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance." Tonight's concert has raised more than just funds. It's raised awareness of the incredible resilience and potential in every person. The crowd cheered, and Henry felt a swell of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the joy of performing. It was the realization that he had found his place again. After the concert, Henry approached Elena, his expression earnest. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me." Elena shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Henry. You did this, you took the steps, you found the courage." Henry smiled, but his eyes glimmered with determination. "Then let me pay it forward. I want to help the shelter in any way I can. Maybe teach music classes for the kids or organize more events like this." Elena's face lit up. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Music has a way of healing and bringing people together. You've already shown us that." In the months that followed, Henry became an integral part of the shelter's community. He started a music program, teaching children and adults alike to express themselves through song. His story began to spread beyond the shelter, inspiring others to see the homeless not as invisible burdens, but as people with untapped potential and untold stories. Through his journey, Henry discovered that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about using it to build a better future. And as he sat at the piano, surrounded by laughter and music, he knew he had found a purpose far greater than he had ever imagined. For Elena, watching Henry's transformation was a reminder of why she had chosen this path. Her belief in small acts of kindness had blossomed into something far-reaching, proving that a single moment of compassion could change lives in ways she could never have predicted. Together, they created a ripple effect, one that started with a sandwich and a conversation on a cold winter night and grew into a movement of hope and humanity. The gentle hum of the piano filled the shelter's main room as Henry played a soothing melody. The children gathered around him swaying to the rhythm. It had become a daily ritual, a moment of peace in a world that often felt chaotic. The once dusty piano now gleamed, a symbol of hope and transformation, much like Henry himself. Elena stood at the doorway watching with a soft smile. She had seen the shelter help many people over the years, but Henry's journey was special. It wasn't just about a man rebuilding his life. It was about the power of connection and the ripple effect of kindness. Henry finished the song and looked up, his eyes meeting Elena's. "You know," he said as she approached, "when you stopped that night, I thought you were just another person trying to ease their conscience with a small gesture." Elena chuckled, pulling up a chair beside him. "And now I realize you gave me something I hadn't felt in years," Henry said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You made me feel seen. You reminded me that no matter how far someone falls, they're never beyond help. Or hope." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "And look what you've done with that hope, Henry. You've turned it into something beautiful. Something that inspires everyone who walks through these doors." Henry nodded, his gaze drifting to the children laughing around the room. "It's funny," he said softly. "For so long, I thought my story was over. But it turns out it was just a chapter. And now, I get to help others write their own." As the evening light poured through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room, Henry felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had found purpose not in reclaiming his past, but in creating a future filled with connection, compassion, and music. And for everyone who had crossed his path, Henry's story was a testament to a simple yet profound truth. A single act of kindness could spark a chain of events that changed lives forever.